reflect a bit further, I just want to bring in Hannington at this point. Thank you very much, Hannington, for joining us. He's the Senior Global Campaigns Advisor at Tearfund for Southeast Asia. And he's going to come and share with us a bit about how Tearfund is beginning to work out this theology of justice when it comes to business, when it comes to economics, and when it comes to the environment. So Brother Hannington, bless you as you share with us for 15 or so minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I've been really blessed by you, Oliver, talking about enterprise as a mechanism for human flourishing. And this is what we're trying to do here at Tearfund through our environment and economic sustainability advocacy work, creating climate-smart enterprises that preserve the environment and give opportunity for everyone to have a living, a fair living, and also equip people with capacity to challenge inequalities. We do this as a part of the integral mission, believing that for real transformation to take place, everyone must be mobilized. And for that to happen sustainably, we must address systems, whether they are political systems or cultural and traditional systems, but also individuals, trends. And so we believe that we need to achieve that, to shape the politics and to shape culture and social trends. We have developed this idea of movement building people-powered agency in all their spheres of influence. So whether it is addressing issues of renewable energy in Tanzania, or waste collection for young people, getting jobs from waste collection and recycling in Uganda, to tree planting in Malawi, or repurposing solar waste in Nigeria, these are kind of power-based centers we are creating through movement building. And I will share some stories right now. Give an example of our work in Malawi. Part of what we were able to celebrate was there was a plastic ban which the government instituted, and three times now, powerful manufacturers of thin plastics overturned the government ban on production, sale, and use of thin plastics. This was in court. Of course, they have the money to pay the right lawyers. Now, our team, our network, we helped start an association, or we call them networks, the Malawi Creation Care Network, a group consisting of over 45 environmental activist groups. These could be students, NGOs, churches, and people in streets who are mobilized to respond. Our team hired a local lawyer, and after many series of media interviews and marches on the streets and of course challenging it in court, we were able to have the ban reinstated, the government ban on thin plastics. I've just learned that about a few months ago, another person challenged it, even though it was reinstated by the Supreme Court. But we are on it, and we're going to go back, and we are already mobilizing. The team in Malawi have sat today, and we're meeting again tomorrow to agree what our next steps are going to be. But people-powered centers that respond to challenges, especially that touch our environment, knowing the environment is our feeder. Without the soil, without the rain, without the weather, everything else is useless. Give you an example of Joe Screen Center in Nigeria, where young people have been working on the post-oil jobs, thinking Nigeria's oil is failing, the world oil prices are going down, and young people must prepare themselves. And so we have young people organized under the Joe Screen Center, again started by our Tearfund our Tearfund in Nigeria. And we are repurposing, these young people are creating climate smart jobs, repurposing solar panels, recycling plastic waste, making charcoal briquettes from waste, saving trees from being cut for firewood. Part of what we're trying to do as part of the Integral Mission, mobilizing young people to become a part of the solution, the part of enterprise, but also the part of speaking out through advocacy. An example, another one from Uganda, through our ally EcoBricks, our team has been able to mobilize resources during the COVID crisis, especially when it was at its peak at the beginning. We're able to mobilize money, and 25 tons of food were distributed to vulnerable people during the lockdown in that remote city of Masaka. The factory also, which EcoBricks runs, which turns plastic waste into building materials, converted itself to make visors, plastic face shields, and these were distributed to hospital health workers who were at risk for lack of PPE. We have gone ahead to start education campaigns in 30 schools. We call it Plastic for Education, where young people collect plastic at their school, and EcoBricks buys the plastic, transforms it into building material, and the money is used to pay for kids who cannot afford, repair school classrooms and stuff like that. So far, we are in 8 schools, and we're creating debating clubs, and kids are engaging in school strikes, community cleanups. We are raising a generation that will bring the change we are looking to see. They have now started a Planet Youth Facebook group, which provides awards for EES, or environmental innovations by young people, competitions on what innovation on livelihood have you made, or recycling, poetry and music to mobilize communities regarding the crisis of the environment. Let me end with Brazil. In Brazil, the church is influencing decisions now. The church has been mobilized to tremendously respond to real issues. They're analyzing what is government saying and what can the church do. Key church leaders are speaking into the situation of Brazil. Also mobilizing during the COVID-19, the church was able to distribute food and support people with a lot of public health information, people who could not be reached. I want to talk about China and other parts of Asia, but I guess we won't have time for that. But there are still church leaders creatively starting creation care NGOs as a way to align with government policy and reach communities. So this is what we're doing, and you can be a part of it through our WhatsApp group. We have the Renew Our World campaign, which is covering now over a dozen countries across the world. We have the Reboot campaign, where we are calling on the Prime Minister to support the poorest and to tackle emergency and build a better world for everyone. So our approach, people mobilized at all levels, mobilize them and keep them connected to each other, pointing them to opportunities and platforms where their voice can be heard and where they can work together to bring about real systemic change. Thank you, David.
Well, thank you very much, Hannington. You gave us so many examples, inspirational examples, actually, of ways in which you're tackling the issue of, or engaging with the issue of business, environment, and with economics. But you use the phrase that may not be familiar to some people. And I think in the work that I've seen with Tearfund, it seems to be one of the distinctive theological hallmarks of what Tearfund does. You talked about integral mission. And often we think about business, or we might think about economics, or we might think about justice, but we've put these three together. Tell us a bit about this integral mission and how it informs your practice on the ground.
Well, integral mission, thank you for that question. In this case, what I meant by integral mission is if we are to outwork the Great Commission which Jesus left us, we cannot just do one thing like preaching the gospel and that's it. It has to do the whole life transformation. We have to address all the issues that surround people. And in this matter, I've been talking about environment as an issue that affects people in poverty, and that if we are to outwork the Great Commission, we as people, as the church, must be mobilized to address that too.
So do you think, Brother Hannington, that sometimes the lack of integral mission, the lack of an integrated approach, we started on Monday with talking about men, and the men, one of the theologians was saying that actually one of the problems is seen is that we have a superficial reading of the Bible, and also we have a superficial reflection on ourselves. The next day we had women, and we had another theologian come and talk about, she gave us a reading of Hagar that was radically different to what most people have heard. And yesterday we were exploring the theme of restoration. And again, we had theologians offering us a very different perspective on some common texts. But it seemed to me that what they all had in common, even though they may not have called it that, was this integral mission. What do you think are the consequences? I think they're obvious, but I think we need to spell them out. What are the consequences of trying to do business, trying to do economics, and trying to do environmental justice without having this framework of integral mission?
I think the challenge is, if we don't have that, is then you concentrate on one thing and leave others. Of course, we cannot all do everything at the same time, but recognizing that everything is connected, there's nothing that lives on its own. And so whether we are to support those who are doing different things, like Oliver, who is in enterprise, and us who are into environment, and others who are into theology, it's all integrated. Nothing should be left. Nothing should be given the full attention and everything else dropped aside, like we used to do with the gospel, where we preached the gospel and we thought preaching the gospel is enough. We have to get down and get our hands dirty as well.
Thank you very much, Hannington. I think that's a very powerful takeaway in terms of us being able to handle the potentially competing and conflicting or even contrasting concepts that we seek to live out as we seek to do justice. There's some questions coming in, and I'm just going to bring in Claudine at this point, and I'm going to bring in Elaine, and I'm going to just ask them a couple of questions and revert back to some of the questions that are on the that are coming in. But later on, Hannington, I want to ask you a question, please, about this whole idea. You talk about building people-powered movements, not now, later, with agency. And you said that they were climate-smart enterprises that gave people a living but challenged inequalities. That was powerful, tied into some of the stuff that Brother Oliver was saying as well. But let me just throw a question at Claudine Reed first. Claudine Reed is the director of PJ's Community Services and an award-winning businesswoman and a lecturer in entrepreneurship. And she's had a lot of experience. I want to ask you, Claudine, from your experience as a businesswoman, what does the Bible have to say to you about business, about economics and environment, but particularly about business? What does the Bible have to say to you, and how has it informed the way you've gone about doing business in your life?
Hi, David. Let me just first of all say thank you for such an amazing platform and just, stretching the discussion around business, environment, and the economy. In terms of the question, what how do I live out my faith, right? What does the Bible say to me about the way how I live out business? I think it took me a while to get comfortable with the understanding that the way how I've chosen to live out my faith is through the vehicle of business. I believe that business, there's almost like a 4-dimensional approach, right? I believe that business is a vocation. You've got to be called to it. I also believe that business has to be intentional. And I believe that God has a specific purpose for business. And as we discover what this specific purpose is, we are then able to commit to it. But I believe that through living out my life, through living out my vocation, I'm living out the call of God that's upon my life to operate in this sphere of influence, which incidentally is not necessarily easy, because there are occasions where you feel like you are literally in the lion's den. And I'm sure that other colleagues may share similar experiences. But it also reminds me of the scripture that talks about the wheat and the tears having to grow together. Now, one of the big things that I've also kind of got comfortable with, if you like, is this whole notion of money and the sometimes misinterpretation or misquotation, rather than misquotation, about money being the root of evil, when actually we are reminded that it's actually the love of money. It's the love of money that's the root of evil, but actually we need it. And as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as an employer, I realized that in order to have wealth sharing, in order to share wealth, in order to minimize or eradicate poverty, there has to be a discussion around wealth creation. It's the creation of the jobs, it's the creation of the wealth, it's the creation of that, or I think, it's the creation of that seed and how we utilize that seed in order to do good things using the vehicle of business, using the vehicle of enterprise to bring about systemic change, to bring about the challenge, to bring change to some of those disparities that we experience in the environment, using creative innovations. Professor Rosabeth Moss Cantor speaks about thinking outside of the building. Are we able to use advanced thinking strategies that are steeped in a theological framework to help minimize and eradicate poverty, but using the whole notion around using wealth creation in order to do that?
Well, you've given you've given us a lot to think about there, Claudia, and I'm seeing the links. I'm thinking about what Brother Oliver said, and the whole idea that God gives us resources, and then we take those resources and we add to them. We create employment. We create opportunities for people to use their gifts and to use their talents. A question came in, and I'm going to throw it at you because it came directly to you, and we'll explore this. But someone asked, why do you feel that you were called to business? How was that journey? Why didn't you end up singing in the choir or being a minister? Why business? How did that call come about?
Probably that's a fantastic question, and again, it's something that I've had to learn to get comfortable with, right? Because when people speak about ministry, most people speak about ministry in context of the four walls of the church. I think more recently the discussion has been broadened to see ministry outside of the conventional lens of which we are used to. But I also see my ability to operate in the business arena as a vocation, as a call, as something that I've been called to, because I believe that in order to survive in that environment, in order to operate in that environment, there has to be a level of spiritual insulation. Spiritual insulation to me says that I am insulated from the challenges that are, or the different nuances that are experienced within that respective sphere. I need to be able to have an understanding of how to navigate the respective challenges in that environment without it consuming me, without it taking away the tenets of my faith, without it causing me to think, let me cross over to the other side, because I've come to the understanding that the whole narrative about money is not so much about accumulation, but more about stewardship. I believe Oliver spoke about this earlier on in his discourse. I think my call to business is about my call to resource management. It's about my call to stewardship. And I'm very clear and understand that in order to impact society, in order to alleviate the challenges of poverty, that there must be a discussion around wealth creation and wealth distribution, job creation, in order to empower communities. Earlier on last year, I went to Uganda with Tearfund, and I had a fantastic experience just to see how enterprise was, you know, lived out in a completely different way to the context of which I'm used to. And seeing a gentleman taking a loan for the equivalent of £50 and using that loan to purchase a couple of pigs. And when the pigs had its litter, he would then sell each piglet, number one, to repay his loan, but then also to sell on the piglet so that he could then add value to his community, so that he could then become, you know, a major entrepreneur in his village selling piglets. Now, the ramifications of his ability to sell piglets meant that his daughter could go to school. In my conversation with his daughter, and I asked her, you know, what does your father being an entrepreneur mean? She says it means that I don't have to get married at 10 years old. Now I have a vision of becoming a nurse and making something great with my life so that she can then become a help to other people within her community. So the vocation of business, I think, seeing other contexts, seeing how this is lived out in other arenas, in other parts of society, helps me to understand that this is more about resource management than it is about the accumulation of money.
Do you know what? Thank you for that, Claudine. Absolutely brilliant. And you know, you provoked a thought in me, because I went to Ethiopia with Tearfund, and probably like you, if I didn't see with my own eyes what I saw, if somebody reported it back to me, I probably would have thought there was a bit of hyperbole there, that people were exaggerating what was going on. You were talking about people saving 2.5, 3, 5p a month in the beginning, and we met one lady. We called her the Spice Lady, because she started just saving 2.5p a month, something like that, with a group of women. And before you knew it, she had opened a spice shop. She had retired her husband from the police force. She opened the electrical shop. You were seeing all these amazing ways in which people were making a difference. And later on, you're going to see a bit about what Tearfund do on the ground in other countries. And one of the things that I love about Tearfund, they do it in partnership with local churches and local people on the ground. And look, I got one more question for you, Claudine. I'm going to bring the rest of the people back. This question was, I think it's one that you can answer. And someone asked, how do we do business within a capitalistic system that continues to glorify God? And I'm glad I'm not answering this question.
Could you repeat the second half? You
Yeah,
said, how do you do business?
How do you do business within the capitalist system that within a capitalist system, while you want to glorify God? So how do you run a business in a way that really glorifies God in a context and a culture where there's lots of stuff that goes on that isn't stuff that we'd endorse as Christians?
Yeah, wow, another amazing question. And I guess, you know, for the last 25 years of my life, that's right where I've been, right? Operating in this capitalist system, doing my best to ensure that my faith is not compromised. And I think, you know, this goes back to the scripture that I made mention of about the wheat and the tears growing together until the day of harvest, number one. But number two, I think there is also something about the mindset that speaks of living in an abundance community or an abundance mindset. Abundance says there is more than enough for everybody. Abundance speaks of my capacity to provide jobs, to create structures and systems that will allow me to live out my faith, but also allow others to live out their faith. It will allow me to bring solutions to the community, to the city, to the country, to the continent, whatever level that you have been called on to operate, whatever level in society you've been called in to operate. But I also believe that a capitalist society requires lights. We are called to be that city that's set on a hill. We are called to bring light into those dark spaces. And could it be that in our light, in those dark spaces, that we are shedding or sharing, I guess to the untrained eye, it could be seen as innovation. But I think there is a responsibility that I feel that I have as a Christian to help organize my community, to help organize my city, to help organize my country, whatever level that I've been called on, to organize these systems for satisfaction and for cooperation. Now, within those systems, within those conversations, of course, there are going to be tensions. There are going to be challenges where we don't necessarily see things from the same perspective because we're coming from a different context. We're coming from different frames of reference. We're coming from different levels of understanding about what business even means, about what money and resource management even means. But I think it's incumbent upon me as a child of God to ensure that I take that responsibility for wealth creation, for wealth distribution, and for resource management in whatever sphere of influence I find myself, and use my faith as a tenet or as a basis to speak about abundant communities, abundant cities, abundant countries where there is more than enough, and we have the character and the capacity to ensure that we can spread that.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you. Very clear answer. And I think that it just shows the connection between having a conviction and a sense of call and a sense of vocation, which informs an individual's ability to be able to think practically and theologically and scripturally about how they do business in a way that is anti-capitalist, if you want to put that in terms of anti-capitalist being a very exploitative system. Elaine, I just want to thank you very much for that, Claudine. Very helpful and insightful answers. Elaine, you run a business. You're also the marketing and communications person at the Pentecostal Credit Union, and the credit union's been doing some work with BAME, Black and Asian minority ethnic communities around business and around economics. How does the Bible function and all of that? How have the Pentecostal Credit Union used the Bible to cast this vision, and how does it continue to shape that vision today?
Right, thank you very much, David. First of all, I want to say, just like Claudine, how wonderful this morning has been. Oliver, Harrington, Claudine, wonderful, wonderful presentations. We're learning so much from it. So I'm really honoured to be part of all of this. So yes, the Pentecostal Credit Union. Well, to answer your question, David, it is about what it says on the tin. We are a Christian Pentecostal bank, if you like, or finance house. And that means that everything that we do in relation to being stewards actually, because we are, I absolutely agree with Claudine in relation to what we do. We are good stewards of money, is based in scripture and is fueled by our faith. That's how we operate. And to make sure that we actually continue to operate in that way, we build that into our corporate structures. So we have, as most organizations, most institutions will have corporate strategies. This is built into our corporate strategy. We build in our giving, we build in our caring, we building those things that are about, expressing in the way that we do business, our faith, and we monitor it. Oliver talked about how do organizations review this? Well, what we do is every board meeting, our board meets once every 2 months, we have a business tool called an MI, Management Information, and our corporate plan, details and progress around our corporate plan, our corporate strategy is in the MI for us to monitor, and all of those things. It's just intrinsic to what we do. And credit unions generally, and certainly our credit union, are vehicles of economic justice, actually. That's what we're about. And we were established, our particular credit union came about because of discrimination, racism, financial exclusion. That's why we're here today. Our founder experienced it when he first came here in 1955. That was something that inspired him 25 years later, after that experience, to found the Pentecostal Credit Union. And we were founded because our churches and our congregants in our churches were being excluded from mainstream financial provision, from getting loans and financial services at rates that were reasonable and that everybody else could get them at. And we've grown over the past 40 years. Last year, as you mentioned, David, was our 40th anniversary. This is our 41st year now of operating. We are now the second largest, financially largest credit union in the country. We have an asset base of 11.8 million, 2,000 members, a loan portfolio of 7 million. And we have financed the purchase and development of 23 churches. And that's come from us and growing and expanding and flourishing. I love the term that Oliver used about it being more than just poverty prevention, but actually economic human flourishing, which is what we believe in. Our goal, our ambition is to economically empower our members, 99% of whom are Black African and Black Caribbean. And we do that not only through the way that we run, through the way that we run the loan and the money business, but also by reinvesting in our members in their development through various development programs, and also giving outside of our immediate circle in relation to corporate social responsibility. We support projects that are in and around our community that actually we feel maybe wouldn't get that development if it wasn't for our support. So, we exemplify that. As I said, it is what it says on the tin. And we make sure that we build it in so that it becomes indelible and so that we can stick to that. And that's what we do.
Well, Claudine, thank you very much for that, Elaine. Claudine has talked about going to Kenya last year. I talked about going to Ethiopia, and those two things, we saw what we call the self-help groups. And we heard a video earlier where some of them are in Jamaica, they call it Pardon Me, in other parts of the world. It strikes me like, I hope you understand, it sounds like the PCU is an upgraded, sophisticated partner system. Partner. Yeah, and
let me first of all, let me say to you, David, it's you that's saying it, so you can say it. It's all right because it's you. But yeah, you're right. You're right. It's the
self-help group, isn't it? Really?
It's community banking. It's about communities getting together to help each other. And what is the same as Partner is that the credit union is based on a group of people in a community coming together and pooling their money. From that source, from that pool of money, other people can borrow. Now, the difference between a credit union and a partner really is that we are regulated. We are regulated by the government. And of course, you earn money on your savings. In a partner, you don't earn money on savings. You might even lose some money because you have to pay the banker. But in that sense, yes, it is. It really is, and it is about the community caring for each other. And the film, the first film that you showed, where the speaker there talked about the traditions in Africa. That's exactly where it comes from. It is a tradition called Isusu, which is an ancient African tradition, which went to the Caribbean in the transatlantic slave trade. In Jamaica, they call it Partner, but in Trinidad, they call it Susu. In Guyana, they call it Box Hand, but it's the same principle of people pooling their money, or communities pooling their money for the benefit of the community.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And look, later we're going to give you an opportunity to support some of these self-help groups around the world. They're absolutely incredible what they do on the ground. And God willing, some of you will have the opportunity some way or another in the future to see for yourself what they do, but they are just touching people's lives. I mean, I've got so many stories from Ethiopia, and like I said, and I'm sure Claudine from Kenya, if you start telling the stories, people think you're exaggerating, but it's amazing what Tearfund do on the ground in partnership with other organizations. So what we heard from Oliver. He's told us a bit about reading scripture differently, about adding value to what God has already created, to bring in resources. And then we heard from Brother Hannington that gave us a lot of examples. And then we heard from Claudine, who's talked about her own business experience. And Elaine has told us a bit about what the Pentecostal Credit Union do and how it's financially regulated, but in one sense, it's self-help. It's the Pentecostal community coming together to help itself under the financial regulation of the Ombudsman to make sure that everything's good. So we know it's a safe place. This ties into the notion, because we heard about the story of individuals, an individual in terms of Oliver, an individual in terms of Claudine, then we heard about a community response through the Pentecostal Credit Union. This brings me back to the point that Brother Hannington raised about building what he called, and I love the way he phrased it. He said, we need to build people-powered groups that exercise, people-centered groups that exercise agency. What he called climate smart enterprises that give a living but also challenge inequalities. Just tell us a bit about how you go about doing that on the ground and what lessons we might learn here in the UK. I'm going to ask you to be a bit brief, maybe just take about a minute and a half. What lessons can we learn from what Tearfund is doing on the ground, and how do you go about doing it? What lessons can we learn for the UK?
People-powered agency is about finding these people who have capacity but no opportunity. They have capacity to influence others. We bring them together into what we called the movement. We create platforms for them to speak to power, platforms for them to generate money, platforms for them to influence. And by doing that, they address the issues that they come with. Many of them are livelihoods, but they also get an opportunity, a voice where they can speak to people in power and are able to influence and bring about systemic change.
How do you think we might do that in the UK? Somebody's here listening at the moment, they're saying, this is brilliant. I'm hearing some inspirational stuff from Oliver. I'm hearing some inspirational stuff from Claudine. I love this idea of a community response. Love how Tearfund are working it out. Many first world countries have got what we call developing world problems. We've got a huge issue with fractured communities. We've got a huge issue with people with food poverty. And how do we take some of the lessons that you've learned and how do we build on some of those here in the UK?
I think as NGOs, we so many times come up as saviors, but if we come as people who add value to others, when we engage with these organizations, and that's what we're doing in the UK as well, my colleague Hannah is doing that, identify them and show them what value you're going to add to them. And one of the values we, an organization like Tearfund, can add is we have convening power. We know people, we have friends. Anybody, whether in the UK or in China or down in Malawi, they will be interested in someone who wants to add to them. So our job now is to identify those people with potential agency that's not yet exploited. Even here in the UK, they will be interested. And Hannah, my colleague, is exploring that.
Love it. I love it. Capacity, but not opportunity.